I'd like to start this event by acknowledging the Gadigal and Wongal people of the Eora Nation, on whose lands Writing New South Wales is situated. I pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands where you're joining us from today. Feel free to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box if you'd like to do that. And now I am delighted to introduce today's special guest. It's Kate Mildenhall. Kate Mildenhall is the author of Skylarking and The Mother Fault. She co-hosts the first time a podcast about the first time you publish a book. She's a regular host at writers' festivals and at book events, and has interviewed so many authors, including Lisa Taddeo, Sarah Winman, Helen Garner, Tony Birch, Leanne Moriarty, Jane Harper, and many, many more. Kate lives in Hurstbridge on Wurundjeri lands and with her partner and 2 children. She's currently writing her 3rd novel and undertaking a PhD in creative process at RMIT University. Welcome, Kate. How lovely to have you.
It's so lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Rowena, and so lovely to see all these people in the space. I am, as you said, on very rainy Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nations here today. So I pay my respects to elders past, present and future also.
Well, look, this feels very meta for me to be interviewing a writer who interviews writers about writing. It's also a little bit intimidating, but I know you'll be patient with me, Kate. So today we'll be talking about your podcast, The First Time. We'll also be talking about what you've learned about writing practice and process and publishing and presentation. So all the P's we're covering. But first, could you tell us a little about life before you were a writer, if such a time exists? Have you always written?
Look, that's such a great question. And I have always written. In fact, I'm going off to a residency next week in New Zealand, which I'm very lucky to have got. It's between Varuna, where I first met you, Rowena, all those years ago, and the Michael King residency in New Zealand. And then I'm on to the Verb Wellington Lit Festival. And one of the things that I'm doing there is talking in the Bad Diaries Salon, which is a fantastic group, Bad Diaries. You can follow them on social media, and I have to read from an old diary, and the only rule is that you're not allowed to edit it. So I've been going back through some of my diaries, which is, as you can imagine, and for any any diary writers in the room, like utterly mortifying. But I've got one from when I was 10. It's this beautiful green, I've got it here, I'll show you, this beautiful journal that I've got here,
gosh,
which I was given as a 10-year-old as a gift. And it has got in it my New Year's resolution, which is to write every day. And it's got the very first draft of a novel that I started writing in there. So I did always want to be a writer. But what, as so often happens to people, and I'm sure that people in the room, some of you will share this experience, is that when I was good at it at school and I got lots of great feedback for my stories and I felt successful and confident at doing it. And then just when I was at uni, I entered something in a competition, a story in a competition, a local one, and it didn't get anything, didn't get a place, didn't get a mention. And I thought, oh, that's it. I'm crap at writing. I'm not going to do it anymore. And so then for a really long time, I didn't write because I thought if I can't be successful at it, and that was my first rejection or my first failure. And so what I talk about now when I'm talking to especially young writers in schools is you got to practice getting back up after that rejection, because I wish, of all the things, I don't regret much, but I do regret that I missed out on another kind of 10 years then in the middle where I wasn't writing. And it wasn't until my kids, and I became a teacher and I traveled and I was teaching in high schools. But it wasn't until my babies were born, my 2 kids, that I really had this quite kind of visceral need to start writing again. And I did a short course with an old teacher who had taught me before. And then I went on to do the professional writing and editing course at RMIT, which is where it all began.
Amazing. Was there a moment when you started referring to yourself as a writer? Like you always wrote? Yeah, I know, right?
It's such a hard one, Rowena, as you know. I think after Skylarking was published, I did practice saying it. I'm a writer, but I still had my day job. And as many of us have to, as most of us have to, I think I've tried to practice it. I did a fantastic mentorship with Charlotte Wood during the writing of The Mother Fault. Yeah, it was incredible. And she said, you know, confidence is a discipline. You have to practice it. And so part of that was what I started doing. And now when I'm, you know, meeting people at book events, or when people coming up to get books signed, I often ask, you know, are you a writer? And people will go, oh, I mean, like, I am. And I'm like, no, you are. You know, say I'm a writer, even if you just practice it to yourself in the mirror, it still does really have a powerful impact, I think.
Amazing. Completely agree. Okay, so you mentioned Skylarking, and your podcast is about the first time you publish a book. So let's talk about your first book, Skylarking, published in 2016 by Black Ink and 2017 by Legend Press in the UK. Do you remember your elevator pitch?
I do.
Okay,
and this is a what not to do kind of a story, because I wrote Skylarking during the time I was doing the writing and editing course at RMIT, and it was an exercise to begin with. Skylarking is the story of based on a true story, set on the coast of New South Wales, and it's based on what happened at the Cape St George Lighthouse in the late 1880s, between two young women who lived in the lighthouse and this terrible accident or event that occurred. And because I wrote it during classes and I was getting that amazing feedback that people who are in writers kind of feedback groups will know when people are reading things and they're like, what happens next? And so you go, oh, okay, I'll write the next thing that happens. I was getting all of that. And then I'd put in a short story for just a local competition, or maybe an emerging writers festival competition. And one of the judges, I didn't win, maybe I got shortlisted, but I didn't win. One of the judges was Aviva Tuffield, who's an editor and an editor and publisher. And so she contacted me after that to say, you know, have you got a manuscript? Like, really liked your story. Have you got a manuscript? And I was like, nah, like, don't have anything near a manuscript. I've got maybe 30,000 words. But what ended up happening is that part of what RMIT taught us, and I'm sure that Writing New South Wales would say the same thing, is to get to events, to become part of networks, to become part of the community. And I was at an event at the Wheeler Centre, and Aviva was there. And I had about 40,000 words of the manuscript at this stage. And so I went up to her after the event, like put on my big girl pants and said, you know, hi, you won't know who I am, but you know, you mentioned this, and I thought maybe I might submit it to something. Very loose, very not confident. And she said, here's my email, send it to me. And you know, it was the absolute dream. And what I say to people now is, like, be prepared for those moments, because there are these moments where it is your lucky break and you have to be ready for them. And I knew by then from what I'd learned about the industry, that you've just got to go for it. That I could have sat with that email for 6 months or a year saying, oh, it's not ready yet to send, but I basically tidied up what I had and I sent it the next day. And from there, she signed me. So it was kind of like the dream. But I think increasingly, and from what I've learned from all of the people we've spoken to on the podcast, is that there's no one way to get your book published. And the pattern, though, is people who are ready to jump at those opportunities.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you and I first met at Varuna, and I remember when you told that story, just thinking, but she's broken all the rules. And it's
all of the rules.
Incredible payoff. And I think, you know, you would be doing yourself a disservice not to acknowledge that was obviously, you know, the beauty of your writing was evident.
Thank you.
And you know, if you haven't got a copy of Skylarking, certainly get one. You know, so there's a reason why different rules apply to different people, I guess, because it depends on what you're writing and how you're writing.
Yeah, I think though too, on the idea of a pitch, is that it's still so important to have. And one of the things that I realized once I started going out and doing the publicity for Skylarking was that it was so important to have the pitch. And in fact, for The Mother Fault, when that came out, in the middle of a Melbourne lockdown in September 2020, I got much better at doing the pitch, partly because the way that the publicity had to work shifted, and I was doing pre-recording lots of videos and doing this pitch over and over again, writing it on the whiteboard in front of me. And it is a really important thing to get your head around for your own project, and also for being able to talk about your project when, you know, opportunities come up, I think, too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk second times. So your second novel, The Mother Fault, was published in Australia by Simon & Schuster in 2020 and in the UK by HarperCollins UK in 2021. I would say it's a divergence from Skylarking sort of coming of age story. I've described it as part literary thriller, part dystopian adventure. But how do you describe it? Tell us about The Mother Fault.
So The Mother Fault is, at heart, it's the story of a mum who is trying to protect her kids. And that's where I started the story in my head. But what I quickly realized is that for her to be put into a situation of great danger, I needed the world to shift slightly for the setting that I had. So I pushed forward a bit into a speculative or dystopian Australia, where there's ubiquitous surveillance and everyone's got a chip in their hand. And the novel opens when Mim's husband, Ben, has gone missing, and she is under such pressure from the department that she decides to make a run for it. And she ends up on first a road trip across Australia and then a boat trip to Indonesia, for which, for the research, I got on a yacht to do that.
It's a hard life, Kate. This writing lark.
I know. But yes, it was a real divergence. And partly, Rowena, that's because what I didn't realize is I didn't intend to write historical fiction as my first novel. Like I love historical fiction. I love lots of genres, and I read really widely, but it just happened to be the story that, you know, that kind of was gifted to me in a way, by the circumstances and by stumbling upon it. And what I realized was, I see now what everyone wants me to do is just to repeat that success again. And I, being slightly stubborn, was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do I want to do what comes naturally to me in terms of what story is coming next, but also I want to kind of show my chops across a bit more of a range. So it was really fun to hard in a different way to write speculative fiction. And then for this new one that I'm doing, I started going, okay, this is definitely historical. And now I've exploded it and it's also spec fic. So, you know, I think that you just have to, in a way, put aside some of the things we know about genre and expectations of the market and readers, and go, what kind of shape or what kind of vessel holds this story in the best way? And in fact, you said about, you know, how would I describe it? That when I first pitched The Mother Fault, it didn't actually get, I didn't get published by Black Ink. I had to find a new publisher, and I found an agent before I did that. But that's because at that very particular point, there wasn't a lot of dystopian literary thrillers. And now there are, and they started coming out in that year as well. So there's also that aspect that sometimes you hit on a thing that's, there's suddenly a different way to describe it, and you've got a lot of comparative titles to describe it too.
My next question was going to be exactly that. So sort of talking about the differences between writing your first novel and your second. Were there any other things that felt markedly different, but either the writing or in the publishing?
I think it was, in terms of the writing process, I was shocked that it was just as hard, if not harder. And there is something that is really delightful about writing that first novel when you don't know if it's going to be published, and the kind of both ferocity but freedom that you have in that writing. And then when you know there's a market and a deadline, and readers, there's a bit more of expectation you put on yourself. I did a few things differently. I journaled The Mother Fault. So I keep just a Word document basically open on my computer, although it does crash my computer constantly because it sits at about 200,000 words for each novel. But it's my catch-all document. I've actually written about this for Lee Kaufman's blog. I think it's just called something on journaling. But I do that because when Skylarking came out, I was really surprised at how I couldn't remember the process and what happened when and how. And so my journal becomes this document where I put everything I'm reading, all the links to research that I'm doing, the people that I'm talking to, changes that I'm doing, you know, to kind of keep track of it. And the other thing that changed, I'll do show and tell.
Yeah, do.
Because I've just printed this out. So this is for my my third novel that I'm working on now. What I started doing is printing out like the outline, just using the Word document outline. So this is the first one from 2020, like when the book was just a little historical novel, and there's now 13 of these. So I kind of use these to mark a big change in the draft, or a time somewhere where I've made something big, just because I find, and you and people in the room might find this as well, that a novel is a really hard thing to hold in your head. And I've tried Scrivener, you know, I've tried some other things. I can't use them. So I use a whiteboard. I use things like that. I sometimes use timelines. I've got it up on my wall in here. But I did become much more aware of being able to have documents that hold the whole story in your head, particularly as you then move into editing, was something that shifted for me. Also, the experience of being published by a big publisher was very different than a smaller indie. Although, having said that, it was lockdown, so you know things changed there as well.
That's you're going to have such a useful resource there. Are you thinking that you might turn that into a book, maybe a how-to?
Well, funny you should say that. Part of what I'm doing for the PhD is all about creative process, because I'm obsessed with it. I mean, this is partly why I love doing the podcast so much. And you won't be able to see all the titles, but behind me down here is my shelf of books of writers talking about writing, because I just love knowing how writers do what they do and the different ways they come to it. So yes, to a certain degree, the journaling and keeping these kind of documents, not only is it great to be able to show people, especially young writers, when you go out and say, this is how messy it actually looks. Like, this is what a draft looks like. It looks really rotten first. But also to refer back to for yourself as well, especially sometimes you can get lost in your own project, and sometimes you need to find that heartbeat of it again. Yeah. And so those times I'll often go back and go, okay, remember, Kate, that's the beating heart of this novel. That's what is driving it too.
Yeah, great. Kate, I know you to be a great champion of other writers at all stages of their careers. And the First Time podcast is one of several ways I've seen you demonstrate that. Providing really valuable advice to emerging writers, and of course providing a great platform for Australian writing talent. So how did the podcast come about?
So the podcast came about between myself and Catherine Collette, who's the other host with me. We were both students at RMIT together, and Skylarking came out in 2016, and at around the same time Catherine was pitching her first novel, The Helpline. And then she got a deal, and so her book was going to come out in 2018. And we just found that we were in this constant back and forth of her asking me, like, both big questions about the editing process or agents and money and things like that, but also, as it got closer, little things like, what do you wear to a launch, or how do I do my social media, or really, really varied questions. And so we thought, you know what, we should, if we're asking these questions, other people might find these questions interesting. And at that stage, there didn't feel that there was a lot of frank discussion between authors that was public. There was a lot going on in green rooms and at book events, but there wasn't a lot of talk that was kind of transparent. And two people, Jane Rawson and Annabelle Smith, had and continue to have, though it's not as active now, an amazing resource called What to Expect When You're Expecting a Book. And they did things like published their income, or things about advances, or how to deal with agents. And they had this And we actually interviewed them in the first season as well together, because it seemed to us that that was the vibe we wanted to go for, this idea that, okay, well, let's say, I'm really worried about how to do this TV interview. How do I do it? And so that's where we started. And we knew that we also wanted to talk to Australian authors. And of course, in the beginning, we were nobody and had to beg people. Tony Jordan and Claire Coleman got on board really early, and Mel Cheng. So they were some of our first interviews. But, fast forward to now in our 5th season, we can't interview all the people who pitch to us, which is an extraordinary position to be in, because it has not only grown a community that works within itself. Like during COVID, we were like, this is crazy what's happened to all of the writers, and especially the debuts who had books coming out. So we went for one of the little kind of COVID grants, and we got writers to talk to each other, because we didn't have enough time to do all the kind of interviewing, but they talk to each other. It's called Conversations with Friends. So it's a separate little series. They talk to each other about their friendships, and we got things out that way. So the community growth has been incredible. And also, if you told that 10-year-old me or 2016-year-old me that I would be able to say, I've interviewed Garner and Grenville and Anita Heiss and Tony Birch and Sarah Winman and Leanne Moriarty, and, just my mind would be blown, because in itself, it is such a masterclass for me. For Catherine and I, being able to interview all those people. And I also think we've really tried to stay committed to being as honest and frank as we can about, the things that have gone wrong for us along the journey. I lost a publisher in the middle of, the podcast, and we did COVID. We did all the things that kind of are difficult, and are shared feelings in the community we've done as well. And I think that people really enjoyed that as much as what we're learning from the interviews too.
Absolutely. I'm just going to take a quick step back for those who haven't listened to the first time podcast, and you absolutely must do that. That's your homework. But for those who haven't heard the podcast, can you just talk us through the format of your episodes and how you decided on that format?
Yeah, absolutely. So normally there is, or there has always been, part of Catherine and I catching up, and we talk about where we're at with our own writing process. We recommend books that we've been reading, things we've been listening to, stuff we've been watching, and talk about things that might be going on in the lit industry. We also then have interviews with different writers. Over time, we've shifted somewhat what that looks like. And in our last season 5, we've done a master's series where we basically both of us wrote down a wish list of who we wanted to talk to, focusing on Australian authors who had published more than kind of 4 books. And we went down that. So that's where we've had, Michelle de Kretzer and Christos Tolkas and Kim
Amazing.
Scott. And it's been incredible. It's been really incredible. So we've done that this year. And this year we've pushed our focus in terms of emerging writers into smaller featured segments, which happen each other week. So there will be, and we're in planning for season 6 next year, always some of Catherine and I talking, and some of us interviewing other writers as well. And at this stage, it comes out weekly.
Yeah, fabulous. So as you mentioned, you're 5 seasons in now, but casting your mind back to your first season, how many episodes did you have in the can before launching?
That's a really good question. I think we had maybe 4 or 5 interviews, and we had pre-recorded quite a lot of catch up for Catherine and I. There's some at a really technical level. There's some stuff that you have to do in terms of setting up your website and getting access to Apple iTunes and things like that, that you want to have some content sitting there that's not live yet, just so the algorithms can start to kick in and you're actually visible when you come out. And also because, what is now kind of second nature to us and very streamlined. And I must also add, we now also pay someone to do some of the admin for us, because it the number of books and pictures we get is just overwhelming. But we've just got so much better. We've got so much better at that stuff. But we absolutely had a strategy for marketing. We had links to various writers' organizations. We had we didn't have any financial support, but we did we'd set up our social media. We knew who we were able to talk to. At that stage, we were using a studio, which we did have access to via RMIT. Although that's really now so unnecessary because of the way that the tech has changed, particularly over COVID. So we had enough and we had a strategy to know where we were going.
We had a brief conversation earlier and you had mentioned and you just mentioned it now, that the technology had changed. Can you tell us about that technology change?
Yeah, sure. So at the start, when Catherine and I were working out what we wanted to do, we both established that we wanted to do, we wanted to share the interviews and we wanted to talk to authors, but neither of us had much of a inkling to learn the tech in terms of sound production. But we wanted the sound production to be really good. So right from the start, we used our RMIT network to get access to those studios and also to ask for 2 students we had to start off who interned with us as part of their major project for the year. And one of those students, Phoebe, we went on to employ for the next year, and we're still employing now as our audio producer. So that has been incredible because it takes out one part of the workload, which is pretty high to produce a weekly podcast, particularly with the kind of reading that we do. Obviously, once we moved away from RMIT, we started hiring a library podcasting room, which is something that is quite new. We have lots of them in Melbourne libraries. I'm assuming you would have the same. Easy to hire. You have access to them after hours often. But then as soon as we went into lockdown, of course, we had to make use of the tech that we had available to us. And we are still recording now via Zoom. We've found that to be the best way and the best sound quality that we can use. You know, we've invested now in good microphones and things like that. But this is working for us and also works for us in terms of time and the guests that we have access to. Now we're doing international guests as well.
Amazing. And to be able to do, you know, everyone at home, everyone watching now, you could be doing this via Zoom.
Absolutely.
Amazing technology enhancements over time. Kate, how do you curate your seasons? Is it simply a case of at the beginning you took who you could get and now they're knocking on your door?
Yes, a little bit. And it probably, you've touched on the point, which is still the one we discuss the most. Yes, right at the start, again, we had a wish list. We wanted to make sure that we looked at a range of authors in terms of their experience, their background, and what they were writing. So in terms of genre as well. So we were keen to, I think in that first year we had poets, we had children's authors, we had people writing lit fic, people writing commercial fiction, we had a romance writer, crime writers, fantasy writer, and so that was really key to us then. Since then, and we also wanted to get on debuts. Of course, there has to be a balance between the debuts and the more experienced writers as well, because obviously what you're getting with experienced writers is people who are able to tell you the whole story over their career. So someone like, Christos, who I spoke to and had to end up releasing 2 episodes because we spoke for 2 hours and I was like, I can't get rid of this. This is gold. He's got an extraordinary kind of wisdom, or Helen Garner or Michelle de Kretzer or Sophie Cunningham. They can say a lot about what they've learned over their whole career. A debut is more about us being able to platform someone. Now what we do is work out who's key for us in terms of who we want to talk to, because we know that our audience feedback is that when Catherine and I are talking to a writer who we are really interested in, so for instance, I read the book Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which was shortlisted for the Booker, I think, last year. I was blown away by it. And I sent her a message on Instagram and said, this is cool. I love this. If you ever want to chat. And she got back to me and she said, yeah, well, I'll talk to you for the podcast. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm interviewing Maggie Shipstead. But that part of that interview is that I was just so deeply interested in her process and how she made the thing that she made, that was a really good interview. So we know that works. We try and go across a range of publishers, so big ones and indies. We try and make sure that we've got a diverse range of writers. We make sure that we've got still that we, a lot of what gets sent to us is debut litfic. We still try and go, okay, we want someone like Vanessa Len, who we spoke to earlier this year. That interview's not out yet because we did it at Bendigo Writers Festival. But her fantasy, YA fantasy, Only a Monster, is extraordinary. So that was great to talk to her. Someone like Margot Lanigan, who I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, we suddenly saw this huge jump in our list as well, because suddenly all these science fiction spec fic people were listening to us who hadn't before. So, we try, we don't always get the balance right, but we do try and, and we also ask our listeners what they want, and we get some great recommendations that way.
Do you have any top tips if someone did want to approach their favorite writer to ask them to come on a podcast? Are there any definite do's and definite don'ts?
I think that I have been completely surprised how many times people just say yes. And that's, through things like Instagram. I would always make sure when I have been successful that way, I have already posted about the book, so I'll often be following up when I see that author is on that social media channel and is already engaged with what I've been saying about their book. It is someone like, I'm trying to get George Saunders at the moment, trying very hard. And I did actually I got an email back from him to say, hey, be great to talk to you. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Contact my publisher. It's harder to get through publishers and agents. They have way more blocks in place. So if you have a contact, someone like Leanne Moriarty, who we spoke to for the Masters season, is friends with Petronella McGovern, who's a friend of the podcast, and she set that up for us rather than going through publicity, which is the right way that you should do it. But if you can say, hey, we know that Leanne is keen to chat to us, who's the best person to speak to, that's always the best way, because if you can imagine, publishers are getting so many pitches. People are often surprised just if you're on Twitter and you're engaging in conversation with your favorite authors on Twitter, you can just say, I'd love to interview you for my blog, a podcast, whatever it is. And often they will say yes.
Amazing. What fabulous news. Let's try it.
Yeah, try it.
How much research goes into each episode?
I was talking about this recently. For me, for something like Helen Garner, I reckon if I had to put down the hours, that was at least a week of, spread out over time. But I read a lot of the backlist again. I spend a lot of time, and this is my key advice, I always spend a lot of time listening to interviews with the author that I'm going to interview, or watching videos. And that's because it's really important to get an understanding of how an author responds, where they might have gaps, where they might be nervous, how long they need to warm up. Someone like Garner pauses for a long time after you ask a question and then she responds. When I started, I reckon in my first couple of years, I would always jump in at those moments and try and explain my question further or be uncomfortable in that gap. Whereas now I know, and especially if you're listening to how a person responds, that's really important. The way that I do it is that I just open a Google Doc and I dump things in there, interviews, quotes, links, questions that are coming up while I'm reading things. And then just in the days before an interview, when it's fresh in my mind, I start to work out a kind of narrative thread that will take me through. So sometimes that's chronological, sometimes it's not, mostly it's chronological. And I always make sure I know the key questions to ask, because you always want to be a little bit over prepared and have some extra ones. I think I've got much better at being able to listen. And I think to do that, you have to you have to be prepared, and you have to know that your questions are all there. But in that way, a writer will tell you where they want to go. And I think to also, in the masters, especially this year, we're talking to writers who have been interviewed hundreds and hundreds of times. And of course, now people have access to that. So if I'm interviewing someone for my audience, I want to be able to give them something new, because you could go back and listen to, 50 interviews with Leanne Moriarty. I want to be able to give you something new. And I think for that, you just need to have, Charlotte Wood talks about heat seeking, and this is for writing fiction, where you're seeking the heat in something. And I know when I've interviewed Tony Birch a couple of times, but when I interviewed him most recently, I'd been reading a lot of his work, and I'd noticed how much bikes come up, like bicycles. And so knowing that Tony's an incredible storyteller, but again, has been interviewed many times that people could access, I said, tell me about your first bike. And that's where we started. And it was such a delightful way to start the conversation. And it meant that we came in from a different angle. It also changed the dynamic between both of us. And so I think, if you're preparing for interviews, really think about how to make something new. With Jane Harper, I interviewed Jane Harper the other week for a new book at the Wheeler Centre. And we just did a quick 5 at the start. I'd prepped her and said, is this okay that we do this? A quick 5 of things people don't know about you, like most dangerous research you've done, choice of snack when you're writing, things like that, just to get a bit of a laugh and allow the audience to have something new from that. And because when the audience is getting something new, also the person you're interviewing is like, cool, I want to talk about something different. I don't want to talk all the time about the same
right.
stuff.
Fresh information. Yeah, fresh. Yeah. Have you ever had an interviewee who, if you'll pardon the pun, was a closed book?
Yes.
So, yes.
Yep. Yes, I don't think we've ever not put something to air. But there have been times where both Catherine and I have experienced it's just not working. And I think when that happens, sometimes it's okay to, if you're feeling confident, it's okay to acknowledge that and kind of come at it at a different way. Sometimes you have to kind of throw your hands in the air and say, okay, well, we'll just go for the rote answers that you're always going to come up with. But I think, always making sure we do this in the studio and we do it online as well, making sure that you've had a little bit of time to chat, if possible, to try and have had personal emails back and forth rather than always going through a publicist. So sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. Making sure that you have checked things like accessibility requirements. You've mentioned, look, it would be great if we could have the video on while we're chatting if you're doing it online. We won't use that if you don't want us to use that, but it helps us to be able to see each other. Those kinds of things, checking in if there's anything that you don't want to ask or you particularly want to be asked, I think is always a really good one, because then you haven't got a guest who's sitting in a state of panic that at some stage they're going to be asked the question that they don't want to be asked. So I think there's some things you can do to mitigate it in advance. But also sometimes you get someone, this happens at events too, and on panels, you get someone who just doesn't want to play ball. If there's more than one person on the panel, I just kind of cut them out if they don't want to play ball. But if it's a one-on-one, you persevere with loveliness is my best way of doing it.
That's fabulous. Just a quick one. Have you got a favourite memory from your time interviewing either on the podcast or at a writers' festival?
Oh, so many. One I really wanted to mention is that my favorite interview, I think, for 2021, or maybe it was 2020, was interviewing Nadi Simpson.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, about her book Song of the Crocodile. And it was like time stopped during the interview. She's the most gifted artist and writer. And she has such presence that even though we were online, the way she talked about writing, the way she talked about creativity, I just felt like an interview that resonated for me and in me for so long afterwards. So that would be a favorite one.
Yeah. Definitely one of my favorite debut authors. Have you got a favorite debut author? I know that's a question you often ask on your podcast.
Oh, so
or you want to plug a few?
Yes. Do I want to plug a few? We've just released one with an interview, a simulcast with Booktopia, where we had to do our favorite debuts of the year. And it was so hard. But a couple that stand out to me, The Denizen by James Mackenzie Watson was an incredible one this year. Time and Tide in Sarajevo by Bronwyn Birdsall. Again, just love that. And also, for people who are looking at marketing and publicity, Bronwyn and I did a great chat on Instagram, which you can find on my Instagram. And I think Bronwyn's put it up on YouTube as well, about using Instagram and making reels on Instagram. But also she's got a background in marketing, and her website is fantastic. And the way she's done her socials is really fantastic. So that was one I really liked. There's so many. I actually have a whole separate a separate kind of shelf for the debuts. Another one that I'm really looking forward to reading is Every Version of You by Grace Chan, which is a new collection of short stories. So I haven't read that yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. I'm mindful of the time, and I know very soon we'll be asking questions from the audience. So do pop your questions into the chat box if you'd like to ask Kate a question. Kate, in the lead up to our chat today, I've been listening to back-to-back episodes of the First Time podcast. I am loving it. I'm completely hooked. The interviews and advice are just stellar, but you also have this really delightful chemistry with your co-host, author Catherine Curate. What makes that dynamic so special, do you think? Or what makes a good co-host?
Yeah, one of the things is Catherine and I are really different. We are different writers. We write kind of into different subgenres of literary commercial fiction, I suppose. We have very different tastes, as anyone who listens to us and hears like Catherine talking Real Housewives and me talking whatever, like the latest thing that I've been watching. Like, we have really different tastes, and we look for different things. Catherine, for instance, can forensically analyze exactly how a joke has landed in something. I don't have that skill. And so I think that there is something about, which I suppose is what they look for when they have dynamics on radio hosts and things like that. It isn't true that you should actually sit down with your bestie and make a podcast, even though, like, obviously Catherine and I are very, very good friends. There is something about the different dynamics which work. I think we also are both equally committed. You know, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and for the most part, it's not financially rewarded in any way. So I think that knowing that you've got each other's backs, we know that we can rely on each other when something happens and someone's got to get an episode up, you know, etc., things like that. When we catch up too, I suppose we do maybe 5 minutes off air, but mostly you hear our frank catch-ups, you know, because, and I think that's part of it too, that we were both prepared to the same level to be vulnerable. And I think really it's the vulnerability and the frankness and that level of honesty that people are most attracted to.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. So we'll be answering audience questions shortly, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the wonderful Kate will be teaching a seminar with us on talking the talk.
Yes.
Kate, can you tell us what to expect from that seminar?
Yeah. So look, what I want to talk about with writers is the fact that you spend all this time writing your book. And what often people don't realize or are really thrown by is then you've got to go out in the world and you've got to talk about it. And sometimes you've got to do that before it's published. Often you do have to do that. You've got to do that in grants. You've got to do that in the elevator. You've got to do that when you're at events like this. You've got to do it when you randomly are meeting an author at a signing line and they say, oh, well, what are you working on? And you've got to have your pitch like that. So what we'll be doing in that session is talking about how to talk about your own work, and also tips for then if you want to get into interviewing, hosting panels. Like, I get asked so often to do these events, and there really is a need for people who are prepared to stand up and say, yeah, I want to host that. I want to interview that author, whether it is interviewing and then transcribing it and publishing it that way, or publishing it as audio. So it's a session that really is about building strategies and tips about how to prepare for talking about your work and talking with others about their work as well.
Amazing. All right, enroll now.
Yes, and it's in person. It's so exciting.
My gosh, how real people.
Real people.
Amazing. All right, let's go to our audience. There are so many questions, Kate. My goodness.
Amazing.
Tamara asks, when do you show your writing to your first reader, and how many people read it before you do any substantial editing? And Sarah's also got a question about editing, and how long is it before you feel like you've tidied up your manuscript?
These are such great questions. And my first way to answer that would be, it gets longer. The time that I hold on to the work to myself gets longer for each book. And in fact, one of the things that I learned from that mentorship with Charlotte was to hold before giving it out, because I think the way that a lot of us come through and are introduced into the writing world is through courses, potentially where we're sharing our work or we're getting feedback from people. And while that feedback is so useful as you learn your skills and grow your skills, at some point you can also get that kind of death by consensus where you have 20 pieces of feedback and they're all opposite, which is what you can also get when you start submitting to publishers. You know, some people saying, I love this aspect of your book, and other people saying, I hated that aspect of your book. And it actually, you can become reliant on that kind of validation that you get from showing to other people. So I have a real sense, I've got it at the moment, I've got a real sense of wanting to show my work, this new book, but no one has seen it, any of the work for a whole year. And I have kept it really close to try and make sure that my intuition and my knowledge of what I want to say is really clear. And what I mostly recommend to people now is that you'll know if you've got a good reader. Some people just have that friend who's another writer, or another writer they can share with who's a good one. And if not, if you are able to, and can afford to, use the mentorship services that are available for, you know, there are some incredible readers. Tegan Bennett Daylight and Lee Kaufman would be two that I can just mention off the top of my head, as people who just again and again, you see in acknowledgements and the feedback comes back to us. These are incredible readers. So, and then if you already have a relationship with an editor and a publisher, work out whether in fact they are the best people to give you that feedback straight away, because you can end up in a situation where you've given it to your best writing mate and you've given it to your mum, as I do, and they give you feedback and then your editor says, no, go back to the first version, you know? So I think just be careful. Lee Kaufman, in her new book, The Writer Laid Bare, which I highly recommend, has actually got a section in there about when to show your work. Yep.
And Kate, have you named your work yet?
Not in a way that I can talk about, unfortunately.
Okay. I just thought I'd check in case you wanted to mention it. We've got so many questions here, so we'll have to kind of go through them a little rapidly. But I noticed we've got 2 questions about networking.
Yes.
At least 2 as I work my way through the list. So Annie asked, how would you recommend going about networking as an unpublished writer? And Sarah also asked about whether, would you say those who do a course have an advantage over established networks and networking?
Yep.
There might be some more networking questions. I'm sure you'll cover it.
What you get from doing courses, and I mean, you're already doing it because you're here. So the first thing that you would do at the end of this session is to make sure, I'm assuming people are members of Writers in New South Wales. If they're not, you would do that. And if you can't, if for any reason you can't, or you don't have access to doing that right now, follow them on social media. Follow me on social media. Ask me questions if there's follow-up that we don't get to time today. I run a course for RMIT, or a lecture, where I say networking is not a dirty word. Like we've learned that this idea of like, oh, it's a bit ick to kind of be out there. You go to events, you get on socials if that's the best way for you to do it, and say, you know, I loved going to this book event, or thanks Writing New South Wales for doing First Friday. Who have you got on next? And Writing New South Wales will say, actually, we've got this person, and tag them, and then you follow them. So think about it. In any other industry, we would be encouraged to do this. There would be ways to do it. But when you can get to in real life events, get to them, make friends with your local bookshop, so that they know your name. And so you can say to them, you don't have to buy a book every time you go in, but what have you got on? Can I join the newsletter? what would you recommend? Follow publishers on social media if you can. It is the generosity within the writing community is most times an utter joy to behold. And there are so many opportunities that mostly, I have to say for me, that I mostly see coming up on Twitter. So even though it's sometimes a very toxic place to be, there's lots of things that come up that way, or by joining organizations, joining things like the ASA, you get access to all of those kinds of things that are coming in through newsletters.
So Lisa did ask, can you still be successful if you're not on social media? But as you've explained, there are, go to live, in-person events.
Absolutely. You absolutely can. It's just that I find it really an essential part of how I meet other writers and extend that network.
Yep. Wendy asks, what are your tips for finding an agent? But she's specified for non-fiction or memoir work, but obviously you've interviewed so many writers, you probably have some good tips. Yeah.
So the key thing to do is to go to the is it the ALA or Australian Literary Agents Network? I'm sorry, I haven't got that completely right. And you can find a list of Australian lit agents there. The ASA also have their, if you're not a member, you can still purchase it, a guide that comes out every year that has every publisher, every competition in Australia, every agent who's working in Australia. So you look at that. Then you look at the requirements of that agent. You look to see if their books are open. You look to see how they, when they take submissions, some of them take them like on the last Thursday in October. So you follow those things, because what we hear from agents and publishers is that their first way of sieving out a bunch of people, because they get so many pitches that they're not going to talk to, is if they have got the formatting wrong, if they have applied at the wrong time, if they haven't got the genre in the subject heading of the email. So I would really recommend that when you're looking at agents, they all have this information on their websites. Go through those formal channels and do it correctly. Or if you've already got some network existing, you seek out an author whose work might be like yours, or someone who you have access to, and you can say, how did you go about getting your agent? And can you introduce me? Sometimes there's things like that. Literary speed dating as well. Many of the writers' organizations host those kind of events, which is a good way to just get FaceTime with agents as well.
We've got a great question here, and it's you've talked about it a little bit, but there's so much room to move here. You mentioned, this is from Emma, you mentioned being ready to take opportunities when they come your way. How do you know when it's too soon to send your work? And she says she doesn't want to jump in too early and waste opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great one. Something that I heard from C.S. Pacat, who's a fantastic YA writer, is they were talking about having a spreadsheet of agents before they got an agent that they wanted to submit to, and they didn't have their top one first. So this was Australian and international agents they were submitting to, and they kind of let themselves warm up with a couple. So they tested their pitch and their synopsis on a couple of agents that, it would be great to have them, but they weren't the top one. And they tested to see if they got a request for a full manuscript or if those people were interested. So I think there are ways that you can test. You can decide, I'm going to extract something and put it in for a short story competition, or I might test this out with a particular reader. When you've got that, oh my gosh, my work is so hot right now, this is brilliant feeling, that's normally too soon. Normally you have to have gone through that anxiety process of this will never be good enough. And then you come out the other end and you start that feeling of kind of feeling like you're at the starting line ready to go. In a very intuitive way, that's when I would say that's when you're ready to go. I mean, every author would tell you they hold off setting that send button on the submission of the last manuscript for as long as they possibly can. So we're always diving in a little bit before we're ready. But I think if you've tested with at least kind of one trusted avenue, then you're ready to go.
Right. And Amber asks, what would be your best advice for someone who lacks confidence in their writing?
You have to pretend. You literally have to fake it till you make it. So if that means something like, you'll often find if you're on Instagram, there's great things that are just about like daily putting up a post. So sometimes it's about getting confident with your own voice. Lots of people who blog talk about this, like just having to put it out there on a daily basis. If you haven't listened to Magic Lessons by Liz Gilbert, the podcast series, or read Big Magic, the book, I just re-listened to the last episode of that, which is with Glennon Doyle, where she talks about just making yourself get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and blogging every day. And, you have to, in that way, get confident with your own voice. So practice saying, I am a writer. Practice putting your words out to the world in whatever small or large capacity you can, because it's in that way that you start to develop that kind of internal strength, which then publishers or readers recognize coming through in your words.
Great advice. Tamara asks, how did you find the idea for your second and subsequent novels or stories? And do you simply ruminate and allow an idea to surface, or do you research and go looking for a good story idea?
That's such a good question. I only ever have one at a time. Sometimes the idea for The Mother Fault came in just before Skylarking was finished, and I put it in a document called "Do not look at this until Skylarking is finished." And it basically was, woman gets on boat and has to leave Australia with kids. So that was the idea. Similarly, the idea for my third book part of it is set around a union strike that happened in the 30s at an abattoir in Melbourne. I put that in a document and I set it aside. I have got a document that's called Book 4 that I've set aside. But generally, I feel like they are something, again, this idea that Charlotte Wood talks about, an idea that has a bit of heat in it. Liz Gilbert talks about this as well, about something that kind of comes up and won't let you go is how I find something new. So I've not yet been in a position where I'm kind of searching around for an idea. Having said that, I had dinner last night that happened to have both Tony Jordan, the writer Tony Jordan, and the writer Kate Forsyth at it. And both of them have like 7 ideas in their back pocket. So,
Yep.
People have different ways of doing it.
Amazing. Look, we've got time for one final question, and it's a question that I also wanted to ask. Drawing from everything you've learned from speaking to all these amazing writers, but also from your own craft as a writer, Joanne is asking, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to an emerging unpublished writer just starting out? And of course, finding one thing is the challenge. Yeah.
Look, I'm going to draw on a couple of pieces of advice that have come in recently. One of them is from the author Margot Lanigan, who said, who talked about having fun while you're writing. And the other is from the interview that will drop on Monday morning, which is with the divine Holly Ringland, who talked about, writing what makes your heart glad. So to some degree, all of the talk about industry, all of the talk about networking, about social media, about finding your place, all of that you have to put to the side and say, what is the thing that is joyful for me? And of course, we know it's not always joyful, but it is a great privilege to give oneself time and to have the time, even when we force it out of the day in 10-minute slots, to sit down and write. No one is telling us we must do it. It's a choice that we get to make. And for that reason, to treat it with some joy and love and excitement, and to come to the page with this slightly anticipatory feeling that something good is going to happen on the page, even if you're talking about trauma and darkness and dark things. So I think that to some degree, and I can see things coming up in the comments about, well, this sounds like a lot that I have to do to get in the world. Take it back to its simplest thing. Write what makes you buzz. And then from there, you start to think about how to get it out in the world.
Well, Kate, I could chat to you all afternoon and it would be a complete delight. But of course, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much to the audience for being here for First Friday, but big thanks to Kate Mildenhall for joining us.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you all so much for being here and for asking such great questions. And do get on social media if you're on it already. And if I didn't answer a question, you can jump on and ask me there and I can try and answer it for you.
Now, don't forget to sign up for Kate's seminar with us, Talking the Talk.
Do that too.
Do that on the 23rd of November. Our next First Friday will be held on the 4th of November with Miles Merrill, Creative Director of Word Travels. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope to see you at another Writing New South Wales event very soon. Bye-bye.